Chapter 1. The Scent of Ozone. The sky over the Iron Isles didn't just turn grey, it turned the colour of a bruised soul. In the village of Skarfjell, the elders spoke of the sky bleed, a storm so violent it felt as if the gods were flushing the world of its sins. It began as a mist, then a drizzle, and finally a torrential downpour that turned the mountain paths into rivers of treacherous mud. Hakon stood at the edge of the watchtower, his knuckles white as he gripped the railing. He was a seasoned warrior, a man who had seen the shield walls of the south and the ice giants of the north, but his breath hitched in his throat. "Do you smell it?" he whispered to the boy beside him. "Rain, sir," the boy Einar replied, shivering. "No," Hakon said, his eyes narrowing. "Iron and burnt hair." Down in the valley, the forest began to sway, but not with the wind. A rhythmic thudding vibrated through the soles of their boots, timed perfectly with the crashes of thunder. It wasn't the sound of an army, it was the sound of a singular, unstoppable force. Suddenly, the rain didn't just fall. It steamed. Chapter 2. The Bear Shirt Appears. Out of the obsidian darkness of the pines, he emerged. He was nearly 7 feet tall, draped in a pelt so thick it looked like a living shadow. This was the Bjorn Hedin, the bear shirt, a berserker. He didn't carry a shield. He didn't wear a helmet. His chest was bare to the freezing rain, his skin covered in swirling indigo tattoos that pulsed with a faint, rhythmic light. As the freezing rain struck his heated skin, it hissed and turned into a thick fog, surrounding him in a ghostly shroud. The berserker stopped at the village gate. He didn't knock. He didn't shout. He simply inhaled. A long, rattling breath that seemed to suck the very air out of the lungs of those nearby. "Open the gate!" Hakon roared, though his heart told him it was a death sentence. "Archers, loose!" A dozen arrows hissed through the rain. They struck the berserker's chest, his shoulders, his thighs. He didn't even flinch. He didn't bleed red. From the wounds oozed a black, viscous ichor that smoked against the cold mud. The giant reached up, plucked an arrow from his own collarbone as if it were a stray hair, and snapped it between 2 fingers. Then the madness began. Chapter 3. The Trance of Odin. The berserker's eyes rolled back until only the whites showed, then snapped forward, glowing with a terrifying golden luminescence. A sound erupted from his throat, a sound that wasn't human. It was the roar of a starving predator mixed with the grinding of tectonic plates. He hit the gate. The massive oak beams, reinforced with iron bands, didn't just break, they exploded inward. Splinters the size of daggers flew through the air, impaling the guards behind the barricade. The berserker walked through the ruins, his movements a blur of impossible speed. He moved like water, fluid and lethal. A defender swung a heavy broadsword. The berserker caught the blade with his bare hand, the metal glowing orange hot where his fingers touched it. With a flick of his wrist, the steel shattered. He stepped inside the guard's reach and delivered a blow that sounded like a hammer hitting a ripe melon. The rain intensified, the droplets turning heavy and red as they mixed with the gore on the ground. The berserker wasn't just fighting, he was performing a ritual of destruction. He moved toward the great hall where the village's ancient relic, the spear of the first king, was kept. Chapter 4. The Sound of Boiling Blood. Hakon didn't retreat. To retreat was to die with a cold back, and the Norns wove no glory for cowards. He drew Winterbite, a heavy bearded axe handed down through 4 generations, but as he stepped into the mud of the central square, the air around the berserker began to distort. The rain was no longer just falling, it was being repelled. A 5-foot radius around the giant was a zone of shimmering heat. The droplets turned to steam before they could touch his skin, creating a private fog that moved with him. "Hakon, no!" Einar screamed from the ramparts. But the veteran was already moving. Hakon swung. It was a perfect strike, aimed at the berserker's neck. The steel connected with a sickening thud, but instead of severing the head, the axe bounced off as if hitting a stone pillar. The vibration travelled up Hakon's arms, shattering the small bones in his wrists. The berserker turned his head slowly. His face was a mask of stretched, translucent skin, pulsing with blue veins. He didn't use his axe. He simply reached out and gripped Hakon's throat. "The spear," the berserker croaked. It wasn't a voice. It sounded like two tectonic plates grinding together. "The seal is broken." Hakon's eyes widened. The berserker wasn't here to raid. He was a messenger. Chapter 5. The Origin of the Curse. Flashback. The mystery of the berserker began centuries ago under a different moon. He had once been a man named Thorir, a father and a farmer. But when the Great Plague came and the gods turned their backs, Thorir climbed the forbidden peak of Skarfjell. There, in the freezing rain of 1,000 years ago, he didn't pray to Odin. He threatened him. He offered his humanity as a vessel for the All-Father's discarded rage. The ritual was brutal. He had to skin a bear while it still lived and wrap the steaming pelt around his own naked body. As the rain poured down, the blood of the bear and the blood of the man fused. The pelt didn't just sit on his shoulders. It grew into his spine. His heart stopped beating a human rhythm and began the slow, heavy thrum of the mountain itself. He became a Draugr Varga, a living dead wolf. He would never feel the warmth of a fire again. He would never feel the touch of a woman. He was a weapon, kept in the scabbard of the spirit world, unsheathed only when the balance of the 9 realms tilted toward the dark. Chapter 6. The Shadows Beneath the Floorboards. Back in the present, the berserker dropped the gasping Hakon into the mud. He ignored the shivering villagers and walked toward the great hall. But something was wrong. The shadows in the village weren't acting right. The rain-slicked ground began to bulge. From the darkness beneath the longhouses, pale, elongated fingers began to claw their way up. These weren't men, and they weren't berserkers. They were the unhallowed. The creatures, the berserker, had been sent to stop. The berserker let out a roar that cracked the stone of the village well. He finally drew his own weapon, a massive, blackened iron slab that looked more like a butcher's cleaver than a sword. "You," he growled, looking at the terrified Einar on the tower. "Pick up the torch. The rain, it feeds them. Fire is the only way." The mystery was finally unfolding. The berserker hadn't broken the gate to kill the villagers. He had broken it to get in before the things outside could get out. Chapter 7. The Dance of Ash and Water. The battle that followed was a symphony of gore. The berserker moved through the pale monsters like a scythe through wheat. Every time his iron blade struck an unhallowed, the creature didn't just die, it ignited. The heat coming off the berserker was now so intense that the mud beneath his feet turned to cracked, dry clay in seconds. He was a walking furnace, a sun trapped in a suit of meat and fur. "Einar! The oil barrels!" Hakon shouted, clutching his broken wrists. As the rain turned into a hurricane, the village became a battlefield of elements. Water from above, fire from the berserker, and the cold, oily darkness of the monsters from below. The berserker was slowing down. Even the All-Father's rage has a limit. His black ichor was flowing freely now, and the golden light in his eyes was flickering. One of the pale monsters, a thing with too many joints and a face like a cracked mask, leapt onto his back, sinking its teeth into the bear pelt. The berserker screamed, a sound of pure agony that resonated with the thunder. He reached back, grabbed the creature's head, and literally tore it from its shoulders, but more were coming. Thousands of them, rising from the wet earth like a nightmare harvest. The rain transformed from a downpour into a deluge of liquid lead, drowning the screams of the dying. While the Berserker held the threshold of the village square, Hakon dragged his broken body toward the heavy iron-bound doors of the great hall. The hall was the heart of Oakhaven, a structure built from the ribs of ancient whales and timber salvaged from forgotten shipwrecks. But as Hakon pushed inside, he didn't find the usual smell of roasted meat and peat smoke. He found the smell of centuries-old rot. Chapter 8. The Secret Beneath the Sills. Einar followed, his hands trembling as he carried a sputtering oil lamp. The light flickered against the high rafters, revealing carvings that no living villager had ever noticed. They weren't scenes of harvests or hunts, they were maps of the underworld. Helheim. "Lift the rug," a voice rasped. Hakon turned. The Berserker stood in the doorway, his silhouette framed by a flash of lightning. He was covered in the black ichor of the unhallowed, his chest heaving with a wet, mechanical rattle. He didn't enter. It was as if an invisible barrier held him at the threshold. Einar kicked aside the heavy bearskin rug in the center of the hall. Beneath it lay a trapdoor made of star metal. Cold, blue, and etched with runes that hummed in a low frequency, vibrating the very marrow in their bones. "The spear is not a weapon," the Berserker growled, his golden eyes dimming. "It is a key, and the lock is hungry." Chapter 9. The Relic of the First King. Hakon pried open the metal hatch. A gust of air hit them, not cold, but unnaturally warm and smelling of sulfur. Below lay a stone chamber, and in its center, embedded in a block of obsidian, was the Gungnir shard. It wasn't a spear anymore. It was a jagged fragment of celestial iron, pulsing with a rhythmic amber light that matched the Berserker's eyes. "They didn't come for your gold, little mortals," the Berserker said, his voice dropping to a whisper as a pale, multi-jointed hand gripped the doorframe behind him. He didn't turn to fight it. He was spent. "The unhallowed are the shadows of those who died without honor. They want the shard to pierce the veil, to bring the eternal night." Chapter 10. The Choice of the Coward and the King. Outside, the village was disappearing. The houses were being pulled into the mud by thousands of pale hands. The rain was now so thick, it was like drowning on dry land. The Berserker fell to one knee. The transformation was reversing. The bear pelt was beginning to slough off his shoulders, revealing the withered grey skin of a man who should have been dead 500 years ago. "Einar!" Hakon choked out, looking at the boy. "The shard. It needs blood. Not the blood of a monster. The blood of the innocent to seal the gate." The mystery was finally laid bare. The Berserker hadn't come to save them because he was a hero. He was the shepherd of the sacrifice. He had led the monsters here so they could be trapped, but the trap required a soul to spring it. Einar looked at the glowing shard, then at the dying warrior in the doorway, and finally at the darkness crawling over the threshold. The rain did not stop. It thickened into a black, viscous grease that smelled of ancient tombs and copper. The rhythmic thumping of the unhallowed against the great hall's walls sounded like 1,000 wet hearts beating at once. Chapter 11. The Betrayal of the Bloodline. Hakon stood over the star metal hatch, his face distorted by the flickering amber light of the Gungnir shard. He didn't look like a village protector anymore. He looked like a vulture, circling a fresh kill. "You knew," Einar whispered, backing away from the pit. "You knew the Berserker wasn't the monster. We were the bait." Hakon didn't blink. The pact was signed in the time of the first king's boy. Every century, a storm comes. Every century, a Berserker is sent to herd the shadows to this spot. And every century, a child of the village must take the shard's heat so the world doesn't freeze. The Berserker, slumped against the doorframe, let out a wet, rattling laugh. His skin was sloughing off in grey, papery sheets. "The boy is not the one," he wheezed. His golden eyes were gone, replaced by a terrifying, hollow blackness. Chapter 12. The True Nature of the Beast. Suddenly, the berserker's body didn't just collapse, it folded. The bones snapped and rearranged with the sound of dry wood splintering. He wasn't dying. He was unmaking himself. The bear pelt didn't fall off. It began to pull Hakon toward it like a living shadow. "The shard doesn't want a sacrifice," the berserker's voice echoed, though his mouth no longer moved. "It wants a replacement." In a blur of gore and steam, the bear pelt leaped from the dying warrior's skeleton and latched onto Hakon. The veteran's screams were drowned out by the hiss of the rain as his flesh began to boil instantly. The indigo runes on the floor began to glow, not with protection, but with a binding curse. Hakon's eyes turned amber, his teeth elongated, cracking his own jaw to make room for the fangs. He wasn't a hero anymore. He was the new berserker. Chapter 13. The Silence of the Morning. The Unhallowed didn't attack. As soon as Hakon's transformation was complete, the pale monsters simply dissolved into the mud. They had achieved their purpose. They were the hounds, and they had successfully driven the new wolf into his cage. Einar watched in frozen horror as the man who had been his mentor stood up. Hakon, or the thing that wore his skin, didn't look at him. The new berserker picked up the blackened iron slab, walked out into the torrential rain, and vanished into the fog without a single footprint. The shard in the pit went dark. The heat vanished. The creepy epilogue. By dawn, the rain had finally ceased. The survivors of Oakhaven crawled out into a world that felt wrong. The birds didn't sing. The wind didn't blow. Einar stood by the great stone in the village square. He looked down at his own hands and saw a faint, pulsing blue line beneath his skin, the mark of the shard. He realized the ultimate mystery. The berserker wasn't a guardian of humanity. He was a prison guard for something much worse that lived inside the earth of the village. And now the guard had been changed. As Einar looked toward the mountains, he saw a single plume of steam rising from the forest, despite the morning chill. He knew that somewhere out there, Hakon was waiting for the next storm, waiting for the next boy to grow old enough to take his place. The rain began to fall again. Only this time it was warm, like blood.